Janbask Training. Learn and grow.
Today cover these are topic. Learning objectives for this session. What is Microsoft MS SQL Server? Why we use MS SQL? What is a database, table, key factors to create database, tables? Syntax for creating a database? Database files and its usage? Data types and its usage in SQL Server tables? Syntax for creating tables? Databases, relational and others. The database as part of the system architecture. SQL Server versions and additions. SQL Server services and components. SQL Server client tools. Introducing the transaction log. Database snapshots. Schemas and database objects. Practice.
So guys, what exactly is the Microsoft SQL Server? Or first of all, I would say, if I say that what exactly is the server, where exactly this SQL being into the place, and what exactly are the database. So let me just quickly pull my one of the first application here. Okay, so I hope guys you are anyhow using on the daily basis the web application, the banking application, the e-commerce application, maybe Amazon or whatnot. So every application, the major application is having certain the front end system. The front end means either the Android app, either the web app, either the desktop app. All right, all these applications are you have a very good layout, and in the layout you can do multiple things. However, everything you are doing in the layout, if there is no data in the layout, it will be a hollow data. It will be a hollow layout. I mean, you will simply find out one button, but that button will not do anything because it doesn't have any data. You will simply look at the layout, but layout will not pop up your name because it doesn't have any data. So ultimately, the whole data related needs, so data related stuff generally go bottom here in the, I would say, let's say something like this. Okay, so this is what we called as a database. That means each applications you are using as of today has two specific component. One of them is the front end system. All right, this is called moreover the front end systems, or you can say is the user interface, and everyone is fetching or getting the data from the database. Okay, all the data related stuff, all the insertion, updation, deletion, or all the transactions which you are doing related to the data. Okay, whether you are moving your fund from one place to another, whether you are buying out something, whether you are putting something into your Amazon cart, whatnot, everything is going back to the database and being updated with your profile. In the similar fashion, if you are using any let's say ticket booking site, you are booking a ticket, every booked ticket will go to the database and update the system here. So we are going to talk about this particular area in the whole session. All right, makes sense guys? I mean, where exactly we have the database situated in our day-to-day basis. This database, okay, now what exactly happens in the real-time scenario is all these applications are being deployed or hosted on a particular machine that is called the server. Now, if I say you simply the way we have the computer systems today in front of us, okay, be it our laptop, be it our desktop, that is acting as a machine. We have a lot of things into our machine. We have, let's say, the web browser, Chrome, and then we have, and let's say some other stuff, Excel, Microsoft Excel, and whatnot. So this system is acting as a hosting machine for us. In the similar fashion, for the big applications like Amazon, like any banking system, we have the big hosting system, that is the big server. When I'm saying the big, that means we have the lot of memory, we have the lot of RAM, lot of CPU power to that particular server so that it can handle the load of multiple users. In the similar fashion, the database also being hosted on a particular server or a particular machine, that becomes a database server. Okay, so whenever I'm placing a term server, that means we are talking about a physical or virtual machine on which you are going to install the things. So I hope, I mean, let's say here and there you may have installed something. Let's say you have gone to the Google Play and you have installed some application out there. That is also installation, and that installation is happening at your machine. That means your mobile system. In the similar fashion, the SQL server or the database engine has to be installed somewhere. That becomes your database server machine. As of today in this class and going forward, we do not have any big machines available or any training environment. So SQL Server engine you are going to install in your system at your system itself. Okay. All right. So that's where we have the server here. Then the terms comes to the SQL. SQL. SQL is a generic term which is called the structured query language. You may have heard about multiple other languages or numerous things when you have talked, go into the IT field. The first and foremost thing I have seen people either afraid of or not interested into is the code or in the coding language. Because sometimes folks have a tendency to think the coding language is a black screen and doing multiple things in a very faster manner, and they think, okay, this is not their cup of tea. Sometimes people think that coding is a very lengthy structure and lengthy piece they have to write. It take a lot of time and whatnot. So again, yes, coding takes time, but SQL is a pretty much different from the regular coding stuff we do in some other languages. You may have heard other languages like the Python, Java, C Sharp, programming language R, or maybe Photon, Pascal, COBOL, if you are from pretty much old background of the IT. Here SQL is why it is different. SQL is a kind of a command-based language, and it's pretty much similar to what you give as a command in your English statements. So let's say you have a table. Okay. Now let's say you wanted to get some data out of the table. What you say usually, okay, that I want 10 rows from this table who is related to a particular person. In the similar fashion, you have to apply the condition or the statements into the SQL as well. You can simply say select the number of columns, okay, from a particular table, and then you can apply certain filter conditions, putting where this person is this. Okay, so SQL is pretty much easier compared to all other languages we have. The second good part about the SQL is it's a result oriented. Means every time, even if you are writing down a single line, you can simply execute it. It will simply fetch you some sort of data, or if there are certain issues, then it will tell you about the issues. The error methodologies are pretty much simpler and straightforward, and the result set which are appearing in this in the when you are doing any execution around this particular language, that is also simpler than the other coding language. So we will talk about this, but SQL is a generic term. Again, another good part of SQL is, even though you are on the Microsoft product, let's say this whole training is focused on the Microsoft SQL Server. If you are aware about the SQL or related terminologies and related components, you are not restricting yourself to the Microsoft only. You can reach out to the horizon. You can try to work on the Oracle. That is good. You can try to work on the IBM DB2. That's also fine. Go to the AWS, Amazon Web Services, which is the cloud part of IT industry, or Microsoft Azure, which is again a cloud thing. You can then work on numerous database systems. It's not like if you are knowing about the Microsoft SQL, then you are only tend to work on the Microsoft SQL itself. You simply, there may be some bits and pieces which is different, but majorly the overall idea and the feeling behind this particular, SQL language is pretty much same in all the different components provided by the different companies out there in the market. So learning a SQL is expanding the horizon, and learning a SQL is, you should understand about this, about like learning about the data only. So you are simply learning about how the data can be manipulated, how the data can be accessed or consumed. You are good to go to work on any other technologies or any other products available in the market. So the one line here is the Microsoft SQL Server is a relational database management system developed by the Microsoft. So what is the relational database? Relational database is that, I hope you have heard about the Excel, and I am assuming that everyone pretty much here has worked on the Excel as well. So Excel is a kind of a tool in which you can, dump some data in the multiple sheets, sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3, and whatnot. In a similar fashion, in the SQL Server, you can dump the data into the multiple tables and you can relate the tables with one another. The same fashion we do the relation between the Excel's different sheets. We can do the VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP there. Here we can do the primary key and the foreign key joining the relationship. So that's why the SQL called as a relational database system. That means there is a relation between the tables inside the database, and we can consume one data from one table and one data from another, and we can join them together as well. So that's why this is called as a relational database system. Here, I'm proceeding further. All right. I'm not going to cover up why we are going to cover up the SQL, what is the, pretty much a rich feature compared to other products, because as I've already told you, once you are good with the SQL, you can use any products out there in the market. So just don't worry about like you have to work on the Microsoft part only. Okay, then what is the hierarchy of the database here? Server, we already talked about that it's kind of a physical machine where we are going to install the things. Then comes the databases. Databases is kind of a container in which you can have multiple tables, and then you can store the data into your database in the form of a table. Let's say you have a one single machine, but this machine is being used by two different components. One of them is your banking deposit component, one of them is your banking credit card component, one of them is your banking loan component. All three components have three different databases. Okay, that means in the one server you can have multiple databases, and in one database you can then have a multiple tables. Then in credit card database you may have multiple tables, and then maybe on loan database you have multiple tables. And the tables is nothing but rows and the columns, which is totally obvious. So this is kind of a hierarchy we have for the SQL Server. Now, before I jump onto, let me just see what's there. We will talk about these all stuff later on. So generally, guys, you may find out one thing about the way we are, going further is I usually do not look into the PPTs which is out there at your dashboards. PPTs are designed in such a way that it can, showcase you multiple things around the SQL, but as we are starting with the basics, we will first of all, complete the foundation part. We will go step by step. We will start with the baby steps, basically. That's what I'm saying. And then we can proceed further for the advanced level of SQL part. How exactly we are going to start with it and going to use going forward. If you see, if I click on simply connect here, you can see one point is saying to me that connect to the server. That means connect to the machine. Now, I do not have any specific server. This is the name of my laptop on which I have installed the SQL Server. So this becomes my machine name or server name. And then I can simply click on connect. We have two type of authentication here. We will talk about them later on. I can simply click on connect and it will give me the different database and different folder structure out there. Now, first of all, how exactly you are going to install this particular tool? And you can simply click on the SQL Server downloads. Okay. Now guys, here uh, I would suggest to go for the SQL Server 2006. Look, okay, so recent editions of the SQL. Here we have the SQL Server 2019 edition, okay, which is a latest edition. If you guys are using MacBook or if you guys are using the Linux environment in your personal laptops, I would prefer to go with the SQL Server 2019 installation. However, if you guys are on Windows environment, I would suggest to go for the SQL Server 2017, which is pretty much stable, and you will find out most of the things in either in 2017 or 19 common. Again, if you guys are already having anything more than 2008 R2, let's say 2012, 14, 16 or whatnot, leave it as it is because they will also going to work in this course we are going to cover up here. Okay, so my course is majorly focused on the SQL. It's not talk about which specific environment we have to use. We are going to cover up the basics and then we are going to cover up the BI part of it. So that will pretty much similar to all of the different versions of the SQL Server. All right, fine. I'm just pasting this chat, at this point into the chat window here. You can simply click on, there is an option. Okay, when you scroll down a bit, guys, here, there you will see download a free specialized edition. One of them is called as an Express. One of them is called as a developer. So here you have to download the developer edition. And then there are certain few more editions with which SQL Server comes up. And those editions are the enterprise editions, and there is one more I'm not aware about it. So enterprise edition is the paid edition which is being used in your company or in your in your working area, day-to-day life. That edition is having lots of capabilities, and all the capabilities are also there in the developer edition. However, you can see specifically that this is licensed to use in a development environment and in a non-production. That means you cannot build a live application on the top of a developer application edition. Here you have to use that only for your own purpose or for practicing purpose. So you can download it as and when you are going to click on the download part, it will download this component and you can then start installing this one. I'm going to provide you after the class one resource which is related to how exactly you are going to download the SQL Server and what are the step-by-step functional functions you can cover up while downloading it. So just follow that steps, follow that video, and you will be able to download the SQL Server Developer Edition. So here we go. Now let's talk about what exactly is the database here and what is happening when we are going to cover up the database engine. So database engine, guys, again, all the things related to data tables and your application will comes under the database engine. If you click on that, I will see the server name I already talked about. Now let's talk about the authentication part. What is the meaning of authentication? So guys, I hope you have seen, like if you are already working in a firm, okay, every firm is assigning you with one particular ID. All right. And let's say if you are using any system or laptop of your firm, as and when you are, let's say we talk about the machine laptop, as and when you are logging into that laptop with your particular ID, you are anyhow able to access lots of application and your name will appear by default in all those applications. Let's say when you log into your system, you can open the Excel, you can open the anything Google Chrome or maybe some other stuff. So they by default have your name because you are already being identified as a correct person to use that particular machine or a system, because you are already authenticated or your credentials are already checked, your identity is already secured that you are a correct person and you can go into it. In the similar fashion, SQL also go and check whether you are part of a particular organization or not. That is where the Windows authentications comes into the picture. Windows authentications means as in when you are logging into your system, Okay, so let's say this is the name I have logged in with Payal. As in when I'm logging with my name, it will automatically fetch my name. If you remember, when I clicked on the database engine, I haven't clicked or pass on any username and password. It is simply saying Windows authentication. I can click on connect and it will let me in. Why? Because I have already signed in myself into this machine with the ID and password all correct. So that is where the Windows authentication comes into the picture. That means whatever the ID is being assigned to your system, the same ID is being used for the SQL as well, and it can able to authenticate you, and you will be able to jump into it. Now, what is a prerequisite here to be part of the Windows authentication? First, you should be a valid user. Second, you should be able to you should be having your entries into the SQL somewhere so that it can understand that you are the correct user. Okay. And the third, when you are doing the installation of the SQL Server, it will ask you, do you want to add any administrator for that matter? Okay. So that particular thing, you can click on yes, you want to add your ourself as an administrator, and then you will be able to log in into your system, specifically to your local machine. Then there is another option. Okay, let me just click on that, which is called the SQL Server authentication. Now, what is the difference between the SQL Server and the Windows authentication here? So as you know, Windows authentication is taking the username ID when you are logging to your machine. I mean, the name with which you are logging to your system into your Windows, the same name can be used for the SQL Server as well in order to proceed. However, the SQL Server authentication is pretty much different. SQL Server authentication is that means that you are generating some certain set of login ID and password from the system itself, and then these login ID and password can be utilized in order to log in into the system. So let's say if I have okay, what's the okay, here you go. Now you can see right now it is saying this is my server name and this is my user through which I have login. Now if I log into another instance of Windows authentication, it is saying this is my machine name and this is my user. Okay, so this user denotes that it's a local user to the SQL Server. Local user means it is being derived out of SQL Server and it is being consumed in the SQL Server. This is not something through which you can log into your desktop or your machine or in your Windows, but you can log into SQL Server only. However, if you see this, we have the machine name, the backslash, and the username. That means this machine name is acting as a domain name here, and then we have the username. So that is what the difference lying between the Windows authentication and SQL. That is, Windows authentication is related to your environment, your machine, your organization. However, the SQL authentication is local to your SQL Server. Once you are logged into your system, guys, let me just show you what are the different components here inside the SQL Server. You can see we have the different folder here and then some other different icons as well. We are majorly focused on the databases, the first one. If I click on that, expand it, then you can find again certain elements here and a different icon here. This icon is nothing but your database system. If I expand this database part, let's say AdventureWorks DW 2017, I can say then we have the tables, we have the views, external resources, programmability and whatnot. If I expand the table, I can see some table kind of a symbol, rows and the columns header, and then we have the different tables here. So this is what we have as a hierarchy here, the way we talked about into that particular slide. This is the same thing we have. We have the server, we have the database, we have the tables. Now, how exactly you can start on this? How exactly you are, going to work on that? So let me tell you first of all, the first thing, foremost thing, when you will first of all install your SQL Server and you log in into it, you will see inside the database nothing is there. Everything is blank. You will just see these two folders here. So database are the components which we have to create into the SQL Server. Now, guys, in order to do the practice and get familiarized with the SQL Server, Microsoft Systems has provided certain copies of the database which you can directly import in your system. Now, we will start with the things that, okay, I have to create a database, then I will create a table, then I will load the data into the table, then I will start querying the data. However, Microsoft has done some easier things on that. It has provided a component or the database which already have the data, which already have the tables and already have the data into it. So, and this can be common for all the students. So whenever I'm providing any assignments or any practicing questions to you, you can directly refer this database and you can start working on that. So this will be common for all the students. So now let me tell you how exactly you can get the hold of this AdventureWorks Data Warehouse 2017. If you see this particular link, I'm just pasting that again into the chat window here. If you click on that, you will find out download backup files. Okay. In the download backup files, you will see OLTP, data warehouse, lightweight. All you have to do is, if you are having 19 edition, you can download 2019. However, I would still prefer, even though no matter what edition of SQL Server you are using, you have to download this particular file. Okay, when you click on this, it will download something for you. Okay, I already have this download available with me, so I'll let you know how exactly it looks like. So I have downloaded that into my database. Here we go. You see this? AdventureWorks DW 2017.bak 22 MB file. Okay, this is the file which is being downloaded when you click on this particular link. And there are multiple other files available, but I would still suggest you to go over this element only. Okay. Whenever you are installing a big component like SQL Server or these kind of applications, these applications are going to help you. You can develop a lot of things. You can write down a lot of things inside it. So let's say if I just give you an example, let's say I have something like this: select a star from a table mailing address for that matter. Okay, you can see some data is being appeared. How SQL Server will understand like what is the meaning of select from star. In the backend, SQL Server also utilize some information which is being stored into some sort of databases that is somewhere called as a system database. Inside the system database, you will always find these four entries: master, model, MSDB, and TempDB. And they all four serve the different purpose. However, you can say metadata about this particular tool is being stored into the system database. Metadata means what exactly SQL has to do when you click on execute. What exactly is the meaning of select star from? What are the operations SQL will take when you will, using this particular table? Or for that matter, whenever you are creating these new databases, okay, all the information about these databases means when you have created this, how many tables we have into these databases and whatnot, everything goes exactly into the system databases as a metadata. So metadata is nothing, your data about your data. That means information about your data is being stored into the system database. So system database, first of all, is the by default entity. They will by default be there because they are here to support the functionalities of the SQL Server. Okay. So that is the one about the system database. What is the database snapshot? This is a pretty much, bit complex, but I'll tell you the way you are taking a screenshot in your system or in your mobile while selecting two buttons at a time, or roughly hovering three fingers of you, it will simply put you whatever is there on the screen. In the similar fashion, database snapshots also work. At a current stage, no matter what data you have in your database, if you generate a snapshot, it will create a replica of that data set in the database snapshot area. That is totally a different thing. I don't want to jump onto that right away, but this is just a high level idea about the database snapshot. Now talk about these things. These are your play areas, I would say. The database, you can create as many as database possibles. These are totally user related database. You can create as many number of tables here, and you can delete the tables, drop the table, insert the data into the table and whatnot. However, that is certainly is not possible or not recommended to do into the system database, because you haven't created these. These are by default comes up with the system. If you try to do anything into it, it may be possible that your whole system become corrupt. Whole system as in the whole SQL Server piece here. So system database is generally to keep the information about the SQL Server and related components you are going to create. And the another database which I am highlighting here is the database which is user defined database and user created database. Okay, I'll just quickly come on that one. So let's say if you want to create your own database for that matter, all right, how can you do that? So you can write down some commands, create database, and you can then put any name here, DB, let's say ABCD and whatnot. So let me just put one name here. Let's say I wanted to create JB. Okay, 08 2020. This is the name of database I wanted to keep. Now, right now you can see we have just JB7 2020. We don't have anything like this. I can execute it and I can, let's say, refresh it. Now you can see the JB8 2020 is another database which I have here in my system. Now you can see the plain vanilla English we have used. What you wanted to do, you wanted to create a database, you can simply write create database, this. That's it, and the database will be here. Okay, now if you expand this, and if you expand table, right now you can see nothing is there. But there are certain, again, the system table, file tables, and external tables and whatnot. Again, these are system related things. You can simply ignore it for the time being. Okay. Again, whenever you are creating something here, okay, and I'm talking about the real-time scenario. Let's say the real-time scenario in an organization, in a big organization, you are working and you have created something like AdventureWorks, okay, or let's say JB8 here. This is also being created at the server, but it's been again defined by yourself, and you can also restrict the access. I mean, it's not like that only you can see this particular database. Maybe somewhere in your team, some other folks are also there who are using the same server here or same machine address. They can also see and use this database, providing that they have proper particular access or proper access level to this particular database. So again, server is just a machine, and on the particular server we have one SQL server. So you can simply include or insert anything into it that can be accessible to other users as well, providing they have proper access to it. Now we were talking about here the AdventureWorks. Now how can you import this into the system? What I'm doing here is I'm simply deleting this particular instance. Delete and close existing connection. Or you can simply say, I'm not going to do UI anything. Drop database AdventureWorks 2017. Drop create command is simply creating a database here, and drop command simply Activating the database. It's currently in use, so I can say I can click on this. Command completed successfully. If I refresh this, it will not show me anything. AdventureWorks 2000 DW 2017. Now what you have to do, you have to simply right click here. You have to say yeah, right click here. You can say restore database. You can see the third option. Click on that. Now you have the database to be restored from device because you have this backup file presented over here. So backup file is something, you have a database, you can take a backup at certain stages of this so that you can restore it. In the similar fashion, you take the backup of your mobile photos and music system and whatnot. You can backup means you can copy it somewhere, and when you have got new mobile or new laptop or new machine, you can paste it again from the copied location. In the similar fashion, you can take the backup of your database and then you can restore it again as and when required. So I'm going to click on the device part here. Device has 3 dots. These 3 dots are saying that you have to find out a location where exactly is your backup file. I can click on that. I can click on add here, and I can go to directly to my location. Where is my location? As in D drive, I have that something in my database, and I can say this is my backup file. Exactly similar to what I have here. I can simply click on OK. I can click on OK, and then I can simply click on OK. You don't have to do anything. It is saying database restored successfully. I would say great. I will again go refresh it, and I can say this component is appearing over here. So this activities, guys, you have to perform. First of all, you have to install the SQL Server. Second, you have to restore or import this particular database. You are going to use these commands multiple times. So you will be easily able to understand, like when you have to create a database, this is the command you have to use, and when you have to drop the database, this is the command you have to use. There is no cheat sheet. There are several resources available on the internet which can give you, okay, these are all the commands you have to use inside the SQL. But let me tell you, more than 1,000 commands would be there which can do the different things. So you won't be, definitely you are not going to learn anything, or going to read out or remember everything out there. You have to understand the things, like what you are trying to do. So think like this: create database. When you wanted to create a database, you have to simply say create database. When you want to create a table, you have to simply say create table. When you want to, let's say, create a procedure, you can say simply create a procedure, create a function. So this create keyword is going to remain same, and this database and this tend to become change what exactly you wanted to create. That is the first thing. Don't try to just jump onto the board that you have to learn and read or remember these things. You don't have to remember anything. All you have to do is you have to do the practice. As and when you are doing more and more practice, these commands will be nothing but a very, it's kind of piece of cake. You have to simply gulp it. You don't have to learn or remember anything here. You have to just understand the concepts, what's there in the behind, because it's not like this one thing you can do. If you want to create a database, you can simply right click here and you can click on new database as well. It will give you a simple UI where you can simply put the name and you can click on OK. So let's say test one. I can click on OK. It will create a test one here. But I do not prefer to go with the UI elements because that is something you have to understand. Okay, where I clicked last time in order to create a database. But here it's pretty much easier. You have to simply write down this command and that's done. Okay, let's move further into the classes and you will be able to understand this particular thing. The second question you had, what we did for the drop. I simply said drop database AdventureWorks, and this IntelliSense is enabled. I can simply click on this, or either click on this or you can click the tab. When you click on the tab in your keyboard, it will automatically pick up the highlighted one. So you don't have to select anything from here. You have to simply, everything you can do into this command shell, guys. You don't have to go anywhere into these elements, which is looking as a good UI elements to you. You have to simply do everything into the command shelf or this query editor. Okay, guys. Now, as and when you are done creation of the database, now the next steps which comes, as per the hierarchy. So you know that we talked about a hierarchy that we have certainly the server, databases, right, and tables, and then we have the data. Server we already talked about, database we already talked about. So database generally there are just two commands, create and drop, and that too very rarely you are using, because once you are done creation with the database, you are not going to create the database multiple times. Generally it's just a one time effect. But when you are dealing up with the table, there are different ways you wanted to create the tables for. So I am going to tell you how exactly you can create a new table. Okay. So syntax, let's talk about the syntax here. Creation table syntax is again the same thing. Create table, and then you have to provide a table name here. Now each table is comprises of the different elements, the columns, and what kind of column you have to provide into a table. Now, what is the one good thing about the SQL Server which make it differentiate between the SQL and the Excel? This can be again an interview question if you are, applying for the entry level job. Like, do you know about the Excel, and we can store the data into the Excel as well as in the SQL? Like, why we are, purchasing a specialized software just in order to store the data. There are multiple things you can say that Excel cannot, hold up large volume of data, and relationships are not can be defined in the Excel. But one of the very good thing which you can tell about the Excel and the SQL is the hard binding of the columns. What is the hard binding? Let me just give you an example. Let's say I am creating a table employee. I have the ID column, I have the name column, and I have the salary column, and I have the DOB. Let's say in the text file, if I wanted to add something, I can say 1 KL, let's say, and then we have the date of birth. In the similar fashion, let's say I have done like this, okay? But let's say this time instead of ID, I accidentally or maybe knowingly I placed something like this. And here I place, let's say, name. Salary is fine, but in the date of birth again I mismatched it and I placed something like, what is happening here? When you are going to save this particular file, it will be saved. This notepads doesn't have the capability to check whether the data in the columns are correct or not. Whether the data in the columns are exactly the same way we are expecting it. Means we are expecting that ID should be a numeric value only. But here the scenario is different. If you save it, it will be saved. That's it. There is no type checking. Type checking means there is no type checking for the columns. Like if the column is date of birth, whether the date of birth is correct or not. Is it really a eligible date of birth or not? Sort of, for that matter. So this is the difference between any file system or SQL Server. In the file system, you cannot do the type checking. You cannot hard bind your columns in order to store only specific data. But in the SQL Server, if you're trying to insert the A and J into the ID, which has been defined as a numeric, you cannot insert the string values into that or alphanumeric values into that, for that matter. So right, JB8 is the one which I'm going to use multiple times here. So let me just, so whenever I'm going to guys create any new database or any new components, I'm going to create into this database, because this is a blank database and we can create multiple things here. So let's say define a table name. Now guys, one thing here is specifically, whenever you are defining anything into the SQL, like any table, any database, your names, right? Your name should be consistent enough. You cannot, simply say table 1, table 2, table 3, table 4. Always make it a practice that whatever the table you are creating or whatever the components or objects you are going to create here, Their naming convention should be consistent so that later on you can easily able to identify them. So generally we follow like this practice. Like if I wanted to create an employee table, I simply say TBL employee and gives me an idea, okay, this is a table and having the employee related information. Now employee can have what? Column name is ID. Let's put it. And then it has to be a numeric. So the numeric fields in the database can be defined as an integer. int is called as a integer, can hold up values. Now names can be defined as a varchar, and we can provide the length of the name as well. There are more combinations of the varchar which can be called as a char and varchar. We will talk about that in just next slide. Also guys, make sure you have your eyes on these colors. Whenever there is a keyword, okay, which is a kind of a syntax I'm using here, it's coming up as a blue color. Whenever any user defined thing or the things which can be easily defined or changed by the user or user as in you or the developer, it is coming into black color generally. The only difference lying here is name is still something which I am defining, still it is coming in the blue color. I can simply change it to the black one. Why that is important, we will talk about that as well later on. Now again, put a comma, simply go for the next one, that can be salary, will unnecessarily be confused. And then finally we have what? The date of birth. We can put it like date. Now I'm simply going to select it, and there is a button called execute. Either you can click on execute or you can click on F5. Both will work. You can see the shortcut key is associated here, and you can see commands completed successfully. First of all, you can check your table. You can refresh here and you can check your table is appearing dbo.tableEmployee. If you expand it, you can see columns are appearing here. ID, name, salary, date of birth. One specific property which is associated is null. Okay, we will also talk about that. Now, once your table employee is done, you can simply copy it and you can start inserting the data. Now, this is just for creating a table. All right. Now, how can you start inserting the data into it? So again, for insertion, we have some commands. You can simply say insert into which table you wanted to insert it. It's into the table employees. You can put values and you can now start inserting the data. This is the whole command through which you can insert the data into the table. So let's say my ID is integer, I can put 1. My name is a character or a string. Whenever we define a string, guys, in SQL Server, we always define that inside this particular bracket or the quotes. All right. So let's say I have John. Then I have the salary. Salary is again float. I can simply say. Then I have the date of birth. So date of birth is again I'm going to define into this. Insert it. It will say you the message as in the one row is affected. Now I wanted to see what exactly and how exactly the data has been stored into the table. For that, we have certain statement again that is called select a star from a table. Select a star. So star, if I do the mouse hovering over the star, you can see all the column names are appearing, which we have defined. That means a star is asterisk, basically is denoting all the things which is out there in a table. If you wanted to use the or pull out the specific things, you can simply say ID, name, salary. That can restrict the number of columns you wanted to pull out. But generally we, as we are doing the practice, we will simply follow the star one, and we can see this is how the data has been stored into the database. We have the ID, name, salary, date of birth, and one, John, and whatnot. All right. Now let's see what if I do something like this here. Okay. Two, or for that matter, let's say I'll do something like this. A 1 2 3. Now, if I insert the data here, you can see something like this. Conversion failed when converting the varchar value A123 to data type integer. This is what we have as an error message and the proper type checking here. It is considering, okay, whenever something is being provided, it's kind of a varchar, because we have defined for the name, we already have the varchar defined, so you can understand like why this varchar is appearing here. SQL is already aware that this is something which is the alphanumeric value, and ID column is something which is your integer. You cannot insert the alphanumeric values inside the integer. It is giving an error that it cannot convert the A123 into the type of integer. You cannot insert the data. Insertion fails and the data set is invalid. This is what the type checking I'm talking about when we are having a difference between the Notepad, Excel, any other file system or SQL Server. Float. What is the meaning of float? Okay, so float is a different way to define the it's kind of a data type which can define the decimal values. So float is a different structure of the decimal. It can have, let's put it like this. Maybe I'm not sure if this will insert something like this. It can hold up the values after the decimal. That is the only meaning of float we have here. Either you can use the float or you can use the decimal for that matter. So they both are fine. In the float, we don't have any restriction of how many, values after the decimal we can have. If you have n number of values, you can have it. But in the decimal, there is another data type which is called as a decimal that can have a specific restrictions on the number of values after the decimal. Okay, this is how we create the table. This is how we insert the data into the table, and this is how we select the data from a table. All three good. Now let's talk about why we have provided these brackets up on the name. So you can see whenever there is a keyword I'm using, which is a predefined keyword, means if you are having any mistakes into it, like, okay, something like this, it will not make any sense to the SQL. It will say incorrect syntax near the table employee. That means these keywords are SQL keywords through which SQL understand like what operation it has to perform. Now there may be possibility that sometimes you wanted to create a column, but that column is something which is also acting as a keyword inside the SQL Server. So when you are defining a column, you can either leave it as it is, or the best case is you can apply something like these brackets. But the best suggestion is, if you think that one column is something which is also acting as a keyword for the SQL, always try to not use that particular name for your column name, because ultimately that makes some issues unnecessarily when you are doing heavy calculations or complex query creation. So always best practice is do not use any column name which is already acting as a keyword for the SQL. That is the one thing. Now you may have also seen few things I have used here. I am like putting something like double dash, and you can see the things are turning green here. All the green values which is appearing after the double slash or double dash here or hyphens is acting as a comments. Comments are nothing but that means that can be ignored. SQL will not take that into the consideration, and it's not required to execute them. So let's say if I simply execute this, it will say command completed successfully. However, it is not doing anything here. Okay, that means it's the things are commented out, And comments are really important when you wanted to understand like whatever the complex logic you are writing, what is the meaning of that in a plain vanilla English. Okay, so you can simply say here, okay, let's say create the table with employee related information. So comments are simply to help you in order to understand, okay, this why this table has been created, what is the purpose behind it. That sort of thing we usually put inside the comments. And they are totally ignorable, but you should aware like what exactly is the and how exactly you can define the comments. Now double hyphen comments are something which is specifically commenting the one line. If you wanted to, put down the complete paragraph, you can say forward slash asterisk forward slash. Between these two, you can put n number of lines and they all will be treated as a commented section. That means non-executable entities inside the SQL Server. So comments are important to provide more details about the technical things which you are writing down here. Now we comes on to the integer, varchar, float, and date part here. These are called as a data types. Data types means once you have defined a data type with a particular column, that is a hard bind thing. If you are trying to overrule hard bind, as in this is kind of a restriction for that particular column. If you are going out of the way and breaking that particular restriction, SQL will generate some sort of error messages and will show you over here. Now these are not the only data types we have. In the integer, we then have the short int, long int. If you wanted to have a list of the whole data types, how many data types we have in the SQL Server. So this is one of the, again, another link from the Microsoft. Microsoft Documents, guys, is one of the trusted area which is providing you the total details about the SQL Server product. So in the whole session, guys, in the class, like our intent is to cover maximum things with the proper understanding. So as you can see, there are multiple data types. I cannot cover all of them. So I'm just telling you this particular link so that you can go ahead after the class and try to understand like what exactly is the each data type meaning. Major data types which you are going to use would be the integer, variable, character, the date and times. These are the major data types which you anyhow use in your day-to-day activities as well when you are working in a firm or organization, but you should be aware like what exactly other data types are doing here. Okay, so we have the big int, we have the integer, we have the tiny int, we have the small int. Okay, sorry, not short int, we have the small int. Then we have the decimal, we have the numeric. Okay, we have the float, we have the real, we have the date time and different date times addition here. We have then the character, varchar, nchar, nvarchar, and text. So these are the one which can hold up the string values. All right. Then we have the binary strings. We have the binary, var binary images, and then we have some other multiple data types as well. I am not going to use everything because these are not right now required to have a basic understanding of the system. But I'll definitely tell you the difference between these characters string here and why we are, using these big int and whatnot. So let me just, quickly click on the integer here and then the tiny int and the big int for that matter, the small int. So, okay, that's cool. You can see, guys, here. Tiny int is the value which is holding up only from 0 to 250. A small int is the value which is holding up from the 32 to 32767. Integer, which is the common one, is holding up value from the 2147483 this to this one. And then we have the big int. Starting from this value, it can hold up to this value. It is having up the 8 bytes. Now focus on the term of storage. Whatever the data you are going to store here in the table, it is anyhow going to be stored in your system or on your machine only. It's not storing somewhere on the fly, right? Everything is being consumed as a space in your machine itself. So when exactly we have to use different kind of data types? One thing, sometimes you already know that one of the particular column is there which cannot exceed the values from 10, 20, 30, 40, or for that matter 50. Always try to use the smallest possible element which is required, because what happens generally, whenever you define a column, let's say ID, which is a tiny int, it restricts some space in the system, assuming that some data will come. So you can see right now it is just, getting the space of 1 byte, then it can have, based on what you define, it can have the space accordingly. So if you know the values, always try to use it accordingly. If you don't know the values, then you can simply use the default one, which can be integer. Why we focus more on the storage? Right now you are in the beginner level and you do not much focus like, okay, what kind of column I'm using and whatnot. But down the line, when your data or your table is having millions of rows or millions of records, then when you start occurring the performance issues, maybe you are not able to fetch the data in a proper manner, or you are not able to store the data in a proper manner, then these small things will take an effect. Okay, so that's why whenever you are defining a database, you are starting creation of a table, first of all try to understand what columns you are having, what are the values you are going to insert those columns, and appropriately then you can define what is the appropriate data type for those columns. So that is where identification of multiple data types is important to understand, okay, it's better to use integer, it's better to use big int. This is for the integer. In the similar fashion, when we are talking about the string part, we have three different systems. One of them is the varchar, we have the character, and we have the nvarchar. So let's see what is the difference between the varchar and nvarchar. Here I have some. Right. So let's say, okay, I can define it like this. I have A, B, and C. These are the columns. I have A is an nvarchar, B is a varchar, and C is a character. So first of all, let's try to understand what is the nvarchar here. Sometimes what happens, let's say some of the folks are from some different area, maybe Japanese, Chinese, and different nationality. If you know that their names sometimes appear different foreign keywords, for that matter, if we're talking about the French, they have the foreign keywords. They use a lot of, I think, that apostrophes, and I don't know what exactly we should say that thing they put above their characters to identify the vowels. So those kind of foreign characters cannot be inserted into the varchar part. So whenever you are defining a name, it's always the best practice to use the nvarchar, because you don't know what kind of name is going to appear in your system. So nvarchar, having the facility, it can store all the foreign national languages as well. For that matter, it can also have the Chinese, Japanese characters inside it. So that's why we use the nvarchar. Varchar is simple. You cannot use the foreign characters. You can simply use the plain vanilla English, or based on the settings which you have for your database, it will change itself. I mean, let's say your system is already in Japan and its settings is already Japanese. I mean, if you see the timings is already Japan bound and your database properties is also related to that area, then varchar will store the Japanese character, then it will not store the English character for that matter. Okay, so varchar is totally dependent on which system you are working on and what is the properties being set for. Then character. There is visibly no difference between the varchar and character. But there is one thing when we talk about the storage point of view. So what happens, let's say I have ABC. Now here, if I define A as, let's say, A, and C is also A, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you can see we have defined the length of column A, B, and C as a 10, 10, 10. Whenever we are storing the data A, 1, 2, 3, 4 inside A, B, and C, what is happening at the storage level? In the memory, it will take, let's say, 5. This is again going to be take 5 bytes. This will also take 5 bytes, but it will occupy the space up to the length you have defined here. Okay, so that's where the where is coming. Where means the variable. That means whatever the value you are inserting into the column, which is defining as a variable character or nvar, they can change the storage space dynamically based on the length of the element here. But problem with the character is no matter what is the length of inserted string, it will always occupy the 10 bytes. So ultimately what will happen? No matter if you are inserting one string, one character, two character or three character, it will always occupy the space up to the length 10, which will ultimately, unnecessarily filling up the space here. So again, always use the character only on those places where you are aware that we cannot have more than one string, two string, or you know the length of your columns or the data which is being inserted into the column. So what is the best place where you can use the character? Sometimes there are, certain strings you wanted to provide like A, B, and C for the categories. Maybe, yes and no for the answers. And for that matter, multiple other things can be there. So on that area, you can definitely define the characters, which can say, okay, we know that length not gonna be increased from 1 byte or 2 byte. That should be good. Date of birth. We anyhow have the date and time here as a data type. So date of birth is anyhow restricted with the date and time data type. There are different variation in fact for the date as well. That is something I have parked for some another session when we will talk about the functions. Okay, and you may have defined, when we have defined this table, right? There is one thing you may have noticed is DBO. DBO is the full form is the database owner. This is a default string which usually attached to everything we are going to create in terms of tables, views, and whatnot. These DBOs are called as a schema. In the database, there is one more thing we can append here is the schemas. However, it's not widely used, but still you can put it as another structure. Means inside the database we can have multiple schemas, and inside the schemas we can have multiple tables. Schemas again acting as a logical group, guys, here. So let's say if I give you an example here, I have one database which is the AdventureWorks 2017. If I expand it, if I go to the tables, you can see few of the schemas are DBO. Now let's say in the AdventureWorks company, I have some tables which is related to the HR. So HR tables are being defined as a human resource schema, which is just to differentiate that all these tables holding up the HR related data. Then if I go for the person, that means employee, maybe for that matter, all the person related data having the schema person. All the production means whatever the product we are developing, for that we have the production schema, and then for the sales we have the sales schema here, and for purchasing we have the purchase schema. So schemas are logical grouping of the tables so that you can easily identify, okay, which table is having what schema. Okay, this table is part of this schema. That means it is for this specific purpose. However, on a general node, we generally avoid creating schemas to, or unnecessarily avoid the confusion. We put by default everything into the DBOs. But you can every time define your own schemas, and to define a schema, there is a clear thing. One thing, let's say, one thing also important about the schemas is, let's say we have one table. If you are do not providing any schema, it will by default be there, the DBO one. If you are providing a schema for that matter, so I can say, I wanted to put a schema name, let's say employee dot. I have to first of all create this schema. Okay, let's see. Command completed successfully. Now you can see employee schema I have created. So what I can do, I can create a table inside this schema. And the good part is here, guys, that we have same table, okay, with the same name in a different schemas. So that is what make a major use case here. No, it's the same database. So if you see, whenever I select a database, it's always there, GB8 2020. So that means, let's say there are 2 or 3 areas where you wanted to use the same table, then probably you can use the different schemas. Okay. But ultimately, in the longer run, it just generate the confusion. So it's always better to keep a unique name for your tables. If you wanted to differentiate, like, okay, the same table can be used for multiple things, you can, instead of a schema, it's better to use something like, okay, table employee HR, and then again, let's say table employee, for that matter, sales and whatnot. Okay. So generally, as a best practice, always go for the DBO schema. But if you have some specific requirement, then probably you can also use the another level of schema as well. Now, one thing also important when we are talking about the schema. Generally, in the big organization, what happens, guys, that HR department have the separate databases and whatnot. Sales department has the separate database, and the scenario which you have just seen here, right? In the same database, we have multiple tables with different schemas. That is a very rare scenario to be appear. Generally, what they do, they always create a different database altogether for their operations or functioning. Now, but generally, if you think that, okay, no, I wanted to create everything in the same database, then what you can do with the help of schemas, you can define the access level for the users. You can restrict, okay, someone is coming from HR, they can only use the HR related data. Someone is coming from the person, or let's say production, they can use the production related, and someone is coming from sales, they can use the sales related tables only. That restrictions we can put with the help of schemas. So we will talk about that when we'll talk about the login mechanism and whatnot. I think, I'm not sure if that is one of the topic here, but yeah, we will see how can we restrict the access with the help of schemas and tables. And once you have defined a table, now let's say later on you are coming to know, no, I have created a column which should not be a column the way I wanted to create it. So you can actually alter the tables anyhow at the later stages as well. So let's say I wanted to change the salary structure here from float to integer only. What I can do is alter table. The first table which we created was table employee. I wanted to what? I wanted to alter the column. I can say alter column. Which column you wanted to alter? I wanted to alter the salary. I wanted to change it from the float to integer. So I can simply say int. One thing but to remember here, guys. Whenever you are doing anything like altering the column, like the data type and maybe some other things, always remember one thing. What is there in your database as of today in the table? So you can see as of today, the salary is having some decimal values. But what you are doing, you wanted to convert the decimal to the integer. And you know that integer cannot hold up the decimal value. So if I do that, okay, my bad. It converted it, but you can see it automatically changed the decimal to the integer. I was assuming that it will give me some error, but no, that's fine. It is not giving me an error. It is simply converting everything to the integer. So those other values after the decimals are truncated now. They are no longer available into the system. And for that matter, if you wanted to know what is the data type of my column salary here, there is one specific command you can use that is called as a sp help. You can put the table name here and you can execute it. Okay. Now you can see I have the ID, name, salary, and date of birth, and the type is integer, varchar, integer, date. sp help is a command. After that, you can put any table name, and it will give you the total properties of that particular table. All right. So this is the column name which you can get from here. All right. So altering the table, you can definitely do the altering, but I hope you understand now that the name part or the date of birth, something which you cannot alter to something else because they are more specialized in a nature. Integer and float still makes sense. Let's talk about the null part here. Nullable. You can see null is appearing at multiple places here, right? And let's say I wanted to insert some data in my table where I don't want to provide the salary here, or let's say for that matter date of birth. I don't want to provide the date of birth. What I can do, simply apply here. Tuk, tuk, tuk. Okay, column names doesn't match the values. You only wanted to insert the data in some specific column, because in a real-time scenario you may have 10 to have 10, 20 or 100 columns for that matter, and you don't have values for all those 100 columns. So what you can do, if you wanted to insert the data on the specific columns only, you can simply do one thing. You can simply say ID, name, and salary. You can actually define the columns after the table name. SQL will understand, okay, you wanted to insert the data only 3 columns. It will let you insert the data into those. Now you can see we have one John this, but we have the null values wherever we are not inserting the data. Whenever you do not provide any value to any column in a table, and if that column is defined as a nullable, then SQL will insert a NULL here. Now, if I write down NULL here, you can see some specific color, grayed out kind of a thing is appearing here. That means SQL understand null as a different keyword and it treat it as a nothing. So null is kind of a nothing. If you in a common understanding, if you see, it is nothing. So what happens generally, guys, if you see this text file, if you don't want to put something here, what you do usually, you can leave it as a blank, right? Let's say this, and you can, let's say date of birth, leave it as a blank. Same thing in the SQL, in the Excel as well. If you don't want to provide any values into the column, you can leave it as a blank. But the problem here is, if you leave something as a blank, like kind of this is space, SQL treat it as a some value. Okay, even though you are putting like this, or if you are putting like blank, SQL treating it as some sort of string or some sort of values. So what you can do, that's where the null appears. For SQL, even one space is a value, no matter we don't have anything here. But this space also hold up a value with the length 1. So SQL, just to understand the differentiation, okay, if there is nothing, let's replace it with the null. You can consider it as a blank space, but again, do not use the term blank space and null interchangeably, because they both are different things. Because let's say if I put date of birth here and I don't have right now the date of birth value, what I did, I simply put spaces here. So you will see the difference now. Previously, okay, you can see now when we have defined the date as a space, it by default took a default date here. Okay, but here when we didn't even put any column value, it actually put a null here. Or let me just take one more example here for that matter. I think that will make more sense. Let's say name. Okay, let's say I don't want to define anything here right now. That is my one value. And the next time I don't want to even include the name into my columns. That's gonna be my next row. Okay, so ID, salary, date of birth, ID, salary, date of birth. All right, now if I select a star from table employee, now you can see when we are defining a blank space, okay, it is coming up as a space here. All right, but when we are defining a null here, or we are not including that column, in fact, it is coming up as a null. So there is a difference between both of them. Okay, that is the difference between the blank space and null. They both are different, should not be used interchangeably. The second thing, null and 0 are same. No, null and 0 is not same. Null is null, or let's say now if I provide, let's say I wanted to insert one more row here with the 0. I can do that, right? You can see 0 is also appearing. That is not a null. If it is a null, then it automatically replaces the 0 with the null, but that is not happening. 0 is also considered as a value and it has a significance, but null doesn't hold up any significance. So generally, this null does not equal to null. Means this condition here is not similar. It will not yield you any result set. This is not true. Each null component is different in itself. Okay, so you cannot say null equivalents to be a null. No, it's not true. I mean, why SQL, even it is, taking the date of birth as a null value, even though date of birth should always have a value. And if you wanted to change those properties, right, that date of birth should not take any null values, you have to actually define something like not null when you are creating a column. Once you are defining this property as a not null, SQL will never take a null value for it. Let me just give you this example. So right now we have this birth date, right? It was DOB, right? So I can say DOB, and I can say it will again give me an error. Why? Because I'm trying to make this column not null, but I already have one value, which is the null here. So what I'm gonna do, I'm going to delete that value. I am going to get rid of this null statement here. Delete from table employee where date of birth is null. Simply remove it. Now I am going to alter the table and adding not null. This is done. Now let's go back to that statement where we have excluded the date of birth here. So I'm just going to exclude it. Okay, and I'm going to exclude it here. Now you can see, cannot insert the values null into the column date of birth. Column does not allow the null. That means just by defining a column name as a birth date, it doesn't make any sense for SQL. You have to specifically tell it, okay, you want this column not to be a null statement, or should not be a null, and null should not be inserted into these columns. Okay, these things, not null, and there are certain other things related to it called as a constraints in the SQL Server. About that,
Jan Bass Training. Learn and grow.